One of the questions I get most frequently is the question, do you regret the sale to Amazon? And the answer to that is, I regret the circumstances that existed at that time that made that the best alternative for us.
John, thank you so much. It's wonderful to get to talk to you, a longtime Whole Foods customer, first time opportunity to chat with you. I've done a lot of reading and listening to understand your story. And I'd like to go back to the 1970s to start and understand what your life was like in college and where you got the desire to go work in a vegetarian food co-op.
I was young and I had no sense of purpose or direction, but I was increasingly sort of felt like I was an outsider. I for various reasons, I got off the path that my parents were programming me for, and my friends, the path my friends were going down to, which would be to go to law school or medical school and join one of the professions. That's certainly what my parents wanted me to do, and I think because I experimented with psychedelic drugs back in my early 20s, that took me off that path, and I became a seeker. I was looking for the meaning of life, and I went back and forth between two universities, University of Texas in Austin and Trinity University in San Antonio. I was, as I outlined in the book, my book, the whole story, it was a psychedelic LSD trip I took back when I just turned 22. It was in August of 1975, and I had an ego death. I merged back into the one. That's how I interpret it. After I was coming down, I ran into this philosophy professor on a walk, Professor Robert Solomon, and he was an existentialist, and he was kind of somebody I really looked up to. I wanted to be like him. I thought, wow, this guy's so smart, and he's so passionate. He was a very intense guy. I thought this was a good person for me to be like. But when I ran into him, I think he was there, but I had a conversation with him in any case. And that conversation, I asked him if, in his teachings, he had taught that there's no real meaning, no objective meaning to life, that it's all meaningless, but that we can make something up. We can create meaning. We're responsible for creating meaning, but there is no actual meaning. It's pretend. So I asked him, I said, Professor Solomon, you teach that there's no objective meaning, and I really don't see, if you really believe that there's no real purpose to anything, then I don't really see how you could be very happy. And he looked at me and he said, you're right, I'm not very happy. And then I continued the walk, and I thought, well, I want to be happy, and I want community, I want love, I want purpose and meaning, and so I decided I was no longer an existentialist. And a friend just said there's this really cool housing co-op opening up. So I went and checked it out, and I thought, wow, these are a lot of cool people. And I thought I'd make friends there. I thought I'd find a girlfriend there, and I did. The woman that I co-founded Whole Foods with. So I was looking for community, and I wanted to not be isolated. I didn't want to be an outsider anymore. I wanted to have friends. I wanted to connect. And that's the path I chose, whether that was a happy accident or destiny, I cannot say, but it had a huge impact on me. It changed my life.
So you move into this vegetarian co-op, and you're adopting a significantly different lifestyle, and you just said you met your girlfriend. How did you two come together, and then how did you come up with the idea of launching what would become Whole Foods?
Well, we came together because I met her and I liked her, and we started hanging out. So,
the old-fashioned way. This is pre-Tinder.
Yeah, so I had this. I call it a food awakening. I had a food awakening at Prana House that I learned how to cook. I became the food buyer for the co-op. I read books. I studied food. I was fascinated with the idea that food could help us be healthier, could help us feel better. Prior to that, I sort of saw, I thought food is like, it's like I'm a machine. I'm like a car, and I have to go into the filling station from time to time and put some gas in my tank, and then I'm out going again. And the idea, well, I'm this organic being that needs nutrients and needs that food is nurturing me, that was a new idea. I mean, it seems obvious now, but it wasn't obvious then. And then I went to work for a small natural food store in Austin called the Good Food Company. And one day, I remember the day, one day I was closing up the store and I was looking around and I felt all this love. I thought, wow, I really like doing this. I'm friends with everybody that works there. I get to serve the customers. We're selling healthy food. And I thought, this is in my realm of competence. I can do this. I'm good enough to do this. And I went home to the co-op and I ran into Renee and I just looked her in the eyes. I grabbed her hands and I said, hey, Renee, what do you think if we opened up our own natural food store? And she looked at me right in the eye and she said, oh, Mac, oh, man, that would be so cool. We were both hippies. Let's do it. And I said, and so we did. And then we did it together. If she'd said that was a stupid idea, what do we know about this? We don't have any money, blah, 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 blah. If she'd thrown water on that, beginning dream, there might not have ever been a Whole Foods market.
So she said, yeah, let's do it. But it's not that easy, especially, I imagine, in 1970s Texas to open a natural foods co-op or store. So when she said, let's do it, you got to get some money, right? So if my memory serves, at first you borrowed money from your father to get going. Is that right?
Well, friends, it's like so many startups, friends and family. Right? Renee's family and friends, my family and friends. And yes, my dad, I didn't have any money. My dad loaned me $10,000 for my share of the investment at 5% interest. So that's how we got started. We needed 50, but we only were able to raise 45, so we made it a go out of it anyway. And was it easy? No, but it was a lot of hard work. But I was 24 and Renee was 20 when we started working on the store. And one of the great things about being young is you don't yet know what you can't do. So you just go forward, and we didn't spend much money. We bought all equipment used, and we hired friends to do the plumbing and the electricity. And we found it was an old Victorian house, actually, that we ended up going into the first store. It was called Safer Way, which was a pun on our joke on Safeway. I didn't have a grand vision for opening up a chain of stores. The original vision was open up one store so we can earn a living, sell healthy food to people, and have some fun doing it. So it was an adventure. It really was an adventure, and it was fun. I look back on it now as a romantic time. I was young, and it was carefree. I love that time of my life.
And John, you've talked about building things being great fun and work being play. For a lot of people, building things is hard and work is hard. So was that just sort of this free-spirited mindset that you had at the time, or was this sort of a vision for how you wanted to live your life? What do you think oriented you toward making things that so many people see as being hard, being fun and play?
Something's hard if you don't want to do it. But if you want to do something, then it might require you to focus. It might require energy. But when you're playing any kind of game, you're putting out forth a lot of energy, but you're focused. You're playing the game, even though you may be playing that game very hard with a lot of passion, a lot of energy. And when you're fun, you don't feel like it's hard. You just are enjoying yourself. And that is a mindset, Jeff. It is something that it's a choice that you make. It's an approach that it's the way you see the world, and I choose to see the world that way, and it's worked well for me.
And as you got started, you've already referenced you had some local competition. Ultimately, you made an offer to acquire one of your competitors. Can you talk about that process and that decision making? Because that feels like a critical moment in your scale journey, going from one store where maybe you're earning a good living and doing some good in the world and living your values to actually building something that's got scale potential.
Well, Safer Way, because we didn't know what we were doing, we put it in not in a busy commercial area. We put it on a sort of a residential street that was zoned for business. And Renee and I ended up living in that house. We lived so Safer Way was a 3-story Victorian house, and on the first floor we put the store, and the second floor we had a vegetarian cafe. It was a vegetarian store. Renee and I are both vegetarians. And then on the third floor, we had an office that also had a futon couch that we could roll out at night, and we slept there. We were not zoned for residential. We weren't supposed to be living there. We were sneaked in there, basically. And, in terms of scaling it, what we realized after about a year and a half, the safer way is we lost money the first year. We lost half our money, $23,000 in the first year, and Renee and I were not really taking any money out. But we learned, we got smarter and better. And I am a passionate reader. I just read and read and read. I read everything about business I could find. But we realized we were too small. We needed a bigger store to compete. We were at a competitive disadvantage. Before I knew what competitive disadvantage meant, I could see that we weren't going to win this game, that we needed to get bigger. And so we found the location first, and then one of the competitors that we were friends with, because we bought things together, and I started pitching them about closing their store down and merging in it, because our store Whole Foods was 3 times bigger than Safer Way and about 4 times bigger than Clarksville, my friend's store. So by putting it together, we had a one-stop big store, and we moved away from being vegetarian. We began to sell the foods that what people really wanted to buy, but was true to our sort of overall mission. And once we did that, the first Whole Foods Market store was incredibly successful. One way to scale is you're successful. If you're not successful, it's very hard to scale. But that store, when we opened it up, people asked me how long it took that first Whole Foods Market to be successful. I say until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the first day. It just was exploded out of the gates. And within 6 months, we believe, based on our own research, we were the highest volume natural food store in the United States after just 6 months.
If memory serves, this is back in 1980, right?
Safer Way, yeah. So 1980 when we opened the first Whole Foods Market.
When you opened the first Whole Foods. And so we're 1980 in Austin, but still in Texas. And you have this explosive launch. Like, what do you attribute that to? How did you get so much right to come out of the gate that strong?
What was happening in the food scene is kind of interesting. People don't understand it today because Whole Foods changed the world, contributed to changing the world. And back then, supermarkets were they weren't that big themselves. They were really ugly, very sterile, kind of like a hospital. And Walmart was on the march, and all the supermarket companies were. And there were lots of independents back then before the chains that changed too over time. But they were all terrified of Walmart. And so they wanted to compete with Walmart on price. So they began to kind of cut labor, cut back on their capital expenditures. Their stores became uglier. And that made them more price competitive, but their stores were less attractive to shop in. And that became, in some ways, Whole Foods' opportunity because we made beautiful stores and we gave great service. And yeah, we were a little more expensive, but lots of people were willing to pay for a better experience and higher quality food. Initially, we were a hippie store. I mean, the hardest barrier Whole Foods for us scaling was convincing people that this wasn't just that there was a market for it. I was told, you guys are a bunch of hippies selling food to other hippies, and we don't think that's a very big market. I heard it again and again and again. And that's because we were a counterculture store, and the counterculture was gaining speed. What they didn't understand was the world was changing. They couldn't see that change. I didn't necessarily see it myself. I just was doing what I was passionate about, and it turned out it's one of the ways to be successful in business. Make sure that you catch the wave that's going ahead. I mean, if you're trying to open a business and nobody wants what you have, you're going to fail. But there was a generational change that was beginning to happen in the United States, and we caught that generational change, and we rode that wave. And we helped create that wave, but we also rode it.
But before we get to where you got to the yeses on the venture capital and the scaling that came from there, I'm struck by 2 things. First, it feels like so many of the lessons and the doors that opened for you to ultimately launch Whole Foods included a psychedelic drug journey, included voracious reading outside of university, what you wanted to read, and learning by doing. And so I'm curious about how you think about young people today and whether that four-year college degree is even worth it for most young people, or whether there are lessons to draw from your path that should encourage them to think about taking another route.
Well, it depends upon what they want, what they want out of life. I mean, if you want to become a professional, you're going to have to get credentialed. You can't become a professional without credentials. That's also a signal, potentially, that you have enough discipline to finish something that you started, right? But if you just want to learn, if that's your goal, that's not always the best way to learn. We'll call it a narrow form of learning. There's learning by doing. There's learning through your own independent reading. I was just so independent-minded. I really just wanted to follow my own curiosity. I didn't like always reading the books that were assigned to me, for example, because some of the books were interesting. Professors liked them, but that didn't mean that I found them interesting. Sometimes I did, and other times I didn't. I took charge of my own education. And once I made that decision and I stopped trying to follow a degree, my life changed. I mean,
John, it leads into the other question, which is there was a decision that may not have been consistent with your personal values to expand into selling meat, right? And so, how did you resolve that business decision that you needed to do this to build the brand and the company the way you had the potential to do with your own personal values?
Good question, and the answer is that you have to make a distinction between what you may personally want and what the market wants. If you don't ultimately sell what people want to buy, you're going to fail. You can be a saint on a mountaintop, or you can go and engage. And so what I found is that my first store was a vegetarian store. Safer Way was only marginally successful because it was vegetarian. And we didn't also sell coffee. We didn't sell meat. We didn't sell sugar. I mean, I always make the joke, we were very, very pure, and we also didn't do that much business. So what we decided was that we could sell different kind of meat that was more humanely raised, meat that was better for the environment, meat that didn't have all the chemicals in it, so that we could take every category of food and we could come up with the very best of class in the category of food. That was part of how we were able to make the merger happen with Clarksville, because they were selling meat. And I knew those guys would really help us to be successful. But that was a non-negotiable thing for them. Although, ironically, one of the two partners was vegetarian, but he just said, hey, my customers want this, I'm going to sell it to them. So once we made that decision, that really kind of broke the dam, and we were really able to explode at that point.
In 1988, you got over those no's and you raised some venture capital, and then you went public. But as part of that process, as part of your growth strategy, your father was on your board, and you all disagreed about where you wanted to go, and you actually fired your dad from your board. Can you talk about what that was like for you personally, and how you handled such what I imagine was such a difficult decision?
Well, first, one of the reasons we were successful in the early days so much was my dad. He had been an accounting professor at Rice University, and then got hired by his clients and ended up becoming CEO of a public hospital management company before he retired. So he had a very successful business career. And I didn't have any business background. But once I got going in it, my dad, it was really good for our relationship, because he didn't, I was this hippie son that was dropped out of college, and he didn't know what to make of me. It's like, what the hell are you going to do with your life, son? And when I found passion about these natural foods, he wasn't interested in natural foods, but he was very happy that I was interested in business. And so we got very close. And my dad ended up being one of my closest friends. He was my best man at my wedding. And he mentored me for the first 16 years of the business, from 1978 to 1994. But ultimately, when I remember I turned 40 years old, we were fighting in these board meetings all the time. Whole Foods was now public. We went public in 1992. And we acquired Bread and Circus, which was kind of the natural foods crown jewel of the East Coast, and Mrs. Gooch's in L.A., which was the crown jewel in Southern California. And it was like those three companies together, that was the DNA that we needed to become a national brand. But my dad opposed both deals, and it didn't make sense to me. He just thought we were trying to grow too fast, trying to do too much. But it's very important that you understand this. I didn't understand at the time why he was so upset. And I didn't understand until really about 6 months after I fired him from the board. I asked him to resign from the board because it was ruining our relationship, and I wanted to run the company without us fighting all the time. But he got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My dad had Alzheimer's disease, and when I studied up on it, that before you know you have it, you have it. It's right. So one of the symptoms of Alzheimer's is a lot of emotional explosiveness. My dad it didn't make sense at the time, and it was only when I studied Alzheimer's, like, oh, this explains why we were fighting all the time and why he was so emotional, why he was upset. He was always upset. And it was only in retrospect that after I'd fired him, that I saw, okay, this is why we weren't getting along so well.
How did you have that conversation with him?
That was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do in business, to be honest. That plus, I'd say the sale to Amazon was also a difficult decision. But I had to do it. We were ruining our relationship. And I basically pitched him. I said, Dad, listen, we're a public company. This is going to leak out to the media. We can't be having these screaming matches at board meetings. It's just unprofessional. It's not the way we can't do this. And he said, we can change. And I said, I don't think we can change. We've tried to change. We're both very passionate guys. I'm a lot like you. We both see our point of view. We're good debaters. And we've tried to change. We can't do it. I really think you need to leave the board. But then I came around to his desk and said, but you're still going to be my main advisor. I'm still going to talk to you about all this stuff. We're just not going to be in the board meetings. You're still going to do your analysis every month on our financials. I'm going to call you up when I have questions. You're going to call me up when you think you see a problem. You're still going to be my advisor, my mentor, but you're just not going to officially be on the board. And I said also, I want you to sell half your stock, because I do think at the time, I don't really think that was an issue in retrospect, but I thought at the time, maybe, he'd made so much money when the company went public and he was at a different place in his life cycle where he was afraid that I was going to drive the Whole Foods bus off the cliff by trying to grow too fast, and he was going to lose some of that value. And I said, Dad, sell half your stock. Sell half your stock and keep the other half. And because we're going to grow the company, and that way you'll have all the financial security that you'll ever need, and your descendants are taken care of, and you don't have to worry about money any longer. Not that he was worried about money. My dad had a successful business career, but he made a lot of money on Whole Foods. So he did that. He sold half his stock. And the interesting thing was, a year later, we had doubled the stock value. So the growth, after we did the Mrs. Gooch's deal, the company stock started to take off. After that, even though I did consult with my father, that was really the first time I really felt like I was actually kind of in charge of the company. I'd been the CEO and chairman of the board, but this was a big step in my own personal growth as a leader to sort of take off those training wheels.
I'm curious about the scale journey after your dad left the board and in the 90s into the early 2000s, because it felt like you all weren't just growing a business, you were transforming neighborhoods and lives as part of what you were doing. So I'd love to hear about that phase of the journey.
What we did was we wanted to expand to become a national brand. And so what a lot of companies do is, retail companies, they decide they're going to go into a market. They say, we're going to go into DC. And then they talk to brokers, real estate brokers, to find us. We want to open 10 locations in the next 2 years. So find us 10 sites. And they deliver the best sites available. But the best sites available may not be the best sites. And we took we said, we're going to expand all over the United States. And we set platforms down, regional platforms down that would create infrastructure so we could grow. So with Mrs. Gooch's, we had Southern California with infrastructure. With Bread and Circus, we had Boston. And from there, you could go down to D.C. and New York. We went to Chicago and opened up a platform there for the Midwest. And then we went to the Bay Area and opened up platforms there. And so this allowed us to expand from those platforms. And but we were looking simultaneously in all these markets for locations. And if we were patient, if we didn't find a great location, we wouldn't do it. I remember I wanted to go to San Francisco first when we came to the Bay Area. We looked and we couldn't find a location that met our criteria. So our first one was in Palo Alto. The second one was in Berkeley. The third one was in Marin County in Mill Valley. And it wasn't our fourth store when we finally got to San Francisco, but it was worth the wait because that San Francisco store became, for a while, the highest volume store in the whole company for us. So patience in not forcing the growth because if you're a real retailer, you're going to spend millions and millions of dollars on a location to build it out, and then you're going to sign a long-term lease, 10 to 20 years. So you're going to be on the hook for that lease. So we just didn't make mistakes in real estate. This is one of the most important competitive advantages Whole Foods had. I watched all our competitors make bad decisions. They wanted to get the stores open. They took B locations and they paid the price for it, whereas we just held out for great locations. And that's one reason we were able to successfully scale. We didn't even have a store that failed for like the first 20 years of the history of the company. Every store we opened was a success.
And is that because you knew instinctively, or you were looking at data? How did you assess what was a good location for Whole Foods that a realtor might have thought was a disaster, or what a realtor thought was a great location that you knew was going to be wrong?
First it starts with demographics. And what we did was we studied our successful stores to see what the demographics they had in common. And obviously population density is very important. In our case, the biggest indicator was college degrees. Who has a college degree? And the places that had the most college degrees, not surprisingly, also had the highest income. Not perfect correlation, because a university town might not have the highest income, but they have the highest education levels. And we would do well there even if the income wasn't quite as high. We always did well in university towns. But when you get the combination of high incomes and high education levels, that would always be a slam dunk for us. And then it was just the basic retail. Does it have good parking? Does it have visibility from the street? Is it at an intersection? You don't want to be mid-block. We had to learn that the hard way. Mid-blocks where people can't easily make left or right-hand turns in, depending on which direction they're coming, can be a real handicap, because people are ultimately about convenience. If you make it easy for them to shop, easy for them to pull in, get their stuff, and be out on their way 10 minutes later, if that's what they want to be, that's going to give you a competitive advantage.
There's a convergence. There's a convergence on both serving your stakeholder, your customer, and creating a great business. You wrote a bestseller in 2013 called Conscious Capitalism that talks extensively about creating value for all stakeholders, not just your shareholders, for your customers, for your team members, for your suppliers, for the environment. And I'm curious what led you to write that book, to take such a public stance on something that in this era of capitalism, very few CEOs were talking about.
The simple answer is that I love capitalism. I love business. I remember when I first got into business, I was skeptical of business. But what I found out about business is that business done in a conscious way is creating value for all of these constituencies. It doesn't just create value. If you go to a party and you ask people what the purpose of business is, what you'll usually hear is what? Well, it's about making money. It's about making money. Business is about making money. And it's an odd answer. If you ask what the purpose of a doctor is, doctors are well compensated, but their purpose is to help heal people. Teachers educate, architects design buildings, engineers construct things, and yet they all make money. They're making money because they're creating value for other people. And business is a tremendous value creator for other people, not merely their investors or their owners. They create value primarily first for their customers, in goods and services that they trade with them. Then they create value, they create jobs. So they are obviously creating value for their employees. In our case, our business was only as good as the suppliers that created these amazing natural food products, the farmers, the ranchers, the foodies who ended up producing amazing craft artisanal cheeses and craft beers and all the different wonderful foods that I've watched people create and invent. If we didn't have great suppliers, then where would Whole Foods be? And then you're in communities, and so you're not in isolation. You're in a real world with governments and activists and all kinds of different people that are connected to your business. And what I guess I think because of that flood that Whole Foods suffered in 2001, soon after we got open, I began to realize that we had these relationships with these constituencies because we should have died. We had 8 feet of water in our store. We were wiped out. And we were literally saved by our stakeholders, although I didn't have that name back then. But they came and they helped clean up our store. The neighbors helped clean up our store. So it's like that stuff, when you find it out, it's like, wow, I owe these people stuff. And our employees worked for free. We couldn't pay the payroll while they got us reopened. So I just had a sense of a debt and I began to see that there's a system. The stakeholders are all interdependent. That Whole Foods is a platform and we're creating value for all of these constituencies. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. And it's like, I just think a lot of business people don't see it. They see it as a bunch of trade-offs rather than a bunch of synergies in these relationships. And once you begin to manage it as a system, you can optimize the system at a higher level. If you cheat any of your constituencies, any of your stakeholders, or try to sell them short, you can get away with it in the short term. In the long run, feedback loops are created, and your business sub-optimizes. So I just realized to create the most value for shareholders, too, you have to optimize the entire stakeholder system.
That's a very thoughtful and pragmatic view that is not in vogue. And your view is consistent with most of the history of corporations in America, right? I mean, originally corporations were created by the state, chartered by the state for public benefit. And the concept that companies exist purely to maximize shareholder value is less than a half century old. From a historical perspective, it's a relatively new way of thinking. And to your point, it really lacks pragmatism. So why, in your view, have we not seen a broader move to stakeholder capitalism, given the history and given that ultimately it should be good for business?
Well, first, I think a lot of people don't see it. So that's not how they don't teach it in business school, or they're starting to, I think, but they haven't largely taught it. You had the shareholder value. Rightly understood, shareholder capitalism and stakeholder capitalism are not opposites. The shareholders would say, well, we want to maximize long-term profits. In order to do that, we have to pay good wages and keep people loyal to our company. We have to serve our customers. Even if you have a maximized long-term profit view, the way to do that, the means to that end, is ultimately to create value for all the stakeholders. And here's what I see that a lot of people don't see. And I think maybe my co-op background helps me see this. When I started Whole Foods, I left the co-op movement, and I was nicknamed in Austin for a while. This is when Star Wars had just first launched. I was called Darth Vader. I was seen as a betrayal. I was no longer a Jedi Knight. I would gone over to the dark side. And I remember when I went and talked to co-ops, they invited me to speak about, I don't know, now it's probably 15 years ago. And I always being a little bit of a provocative guy, I said, well, Whole Foods is a co-op. And they said, you're not a co-op. And I said, absolutely, we're a co-op. We're an investors co-op. You guys are a consumers co-op, and there's suppliers co-ops, and there's workers co-ops. We are a investors co-op. And it doesn't matter which form of a cooperative you are, the same things come into play. Let's say you're a consumers co-op. Well, if you want to optimize value for your members, then for all members in the long term, it's the same thing. You have to create value for the people shopping in your stores. You have to create value for the people working there. You have to create value for suppliers. And you have to retain capital, because without capital, you cannot expand. You can't fix your equipment when it breaks. Capital's not evil. Capital's important. Retaining earnings is how the world makes progress. Once you see it's a system, you have to optimize the entire system. That means optimizing long-term profits as well. There's no conflict. There's no trade-off. It's just not seen correctly, in my opinion.
Was it hard to be perceived by people who were mission aligned as having switched from being a Jedi Knight to being Darth Vader?
Sure. I mean, it bothered me a little bit. That's when my politics began to change. I began to study the history of business, the history of capitalism, and I realized, my gosh, capitalism's done so much good in the world. It's so misunderstood. It's been attacked by, well, the intellectuals are the ones that don't like business. And intellectuals have never really liked business. I'm not saying all intellectuals, just as a general rule. As Deidre McCloskey calls it, the clerisy has always been skeptical about business and has always thought business had the wrong motivations. They were motivated by money, and that's a bad thing. And yeah, some people are strictly motivated by money, but most of the entrepreneurs I've known are just very passionate people, and they're excited to realize their ideas in the world. That they make money too. They have to make money in order to be successful, but frankly, it's about the dream that really drives them even more than the money.
One of the challenges that virtually every business leader with whom I speak is struggling right now is when to speak out on political, social, cultural issues that matter to stakeholders, that matter to team members, that matter to customers. As a business leader who has come in for criticism for articulating some of your views, what's your perspective on how business leaders should address those public issues in the 2020s?
My views changed. Back in 2009, I wrote an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal about healthcare. I really thought Whole Foods Market had a really good system for the way we were handling healthcare that could be adopted on a more widespread scale. But it was very controversial, and it created I look back on it now, it's kind of ridiculous what happened, but I actually punched the button and sent that to the Wall Street Journal, and then I went on a 1-week hike on the Appalachian Trail in the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, where I didn't have any contact with the outside world. And when I came out and my phone blew up with all of these, we were in a state of crisis because of the op-ed piece. We had protests all around the country, and 350,000 people, and within a couple of weeks signed a Facebook petition to boycott Whole Foods Market. Hundreds of letters were sent to our board of directors demanding that I be fired. Then this was back in the Tea Party days. We had Tea Party people boycotting us. They were shopping in Whole Foods Market while other people were boycotting us. So it was like, whoa. I've learned a valuable lesson here. The mistake I made was I couldn't distinguish between my personal views, because I was the co-founder of the company and the only CEO it had ever had. My views were seen as the company's views. I just thought I was speaking for myself. I wasn't speaking for Whole Foods. So that's the first thing a CEO has to realize, is that they are speaking for the company, even if they're just intending to articulate what they personally believe. So you run the risk of alienating key stakeholder groups. I alienated probably hundreds of thousands of people from Whole Foods Market because of my political views, which I didn't intend. It was an unintended consequence. So the short answer, Jeff, in a way, is I think you should stay out of politics if you're a CEO. You can obviously have your personal opinions, but you're always going to be seen as speaking for the company. And if you do controversial things, you're going to hurt the business. And I also think you should stick to things that are within your own wheelhouse. I could speak up about food issues. And I could speak up about animal welfare, seafood sustainability, pesticide usage. That's within the mission of our company.
Are there times where the stakeholder interests and the shareholder interests are such that wading into politics does make sense, or do you draw a bright line now and say unless this is specifically, for example, on food issues for Whole Foods, really you should only do this in private sectors?
When I spoke up back in 2009, so many people were angry at me because they said, "You're not speaking for me. That's just your own personal opinion." And so if, as a CEO wants to, if I just signed John Mackey and didn't have a Whole Foods Market attachment to it, I think that would have been okay. They wouldn't have known who John Mackey was necessarily. I wasn't signing on behalf of Whole Foods Market. But when you sign on behalf of your company, really, I mean, did you take a vote? Did you have all your employees? Did all your customers vote on this? How do you know what all of your stakeholders really want on these particular issues? You don't know. At the end of the day, you're doing what you think might be best, but you're now representing the company, and you don't really know what the company wants. Not really. And so I think as an individual, you should definitely exert your political rights. But once you begin to attach the company to it, I think you've gone too far.
John, I want to jump ahead to the Amazon sale, which you referenced earlier as one of the two hardest moments in your tenure at Whole Foods. When the news broke, my reaction was, wow, that makes a ton of sense for Amazon. I get the value there and the integration with Prime that could be done, the physical footprint it provides Amazon, et cetera. It wasn't as clear why Whole Foods would make that decision. How did the conversation start with Amazon, and how did you ultimately decide that that was the right move to sell?
One of the questions I get most frequently is the question, do you regret the sale to Amazon? And the answer to that is, I regret the circumstances that existed at that time that made that the best alternative for us. The circumstances back in 2017 were we were being attacked by shareholder activists, the people that think only profits matter. And we tried to reason with them. This was JANA Partners, but they didn't want to work with us. They just said, look, we're going to take over your company. There's not a damn thing you can do about it. We're going to throw out your board. We're going to vote your board out, and then we're going to get rid of the management that opposes us, and we're going to sell the company to the highest bidder. And there's nothing you can do about it. And Whole Foods' stock, we'd faced a lot more competition. We needed to cut our prices, but the dilemma that we faced was, how do we cut our prices? And that's the great long-term move. But in the short term, if you're selling something for $1 and now you start selling it for 90 cents, well, initially, in the long run, that'll drive more people into your stores, right? You'll get more business with lower prices. In the short run, your sales just dropped 10% when you dropped your prices 10%. And your same-store sales just dropped 10%. And your stock price is just going to get totally hammered. So you need time in order to make those kind of changes. And the only ways you could do that, one would be to go private. If you go private, which is an alternative Whole Foods looked at, we'd have been taking on, probably $13 billion in debt onto our balance sheet. And if the business turned down, you could go bankrupt. So you're risking your whole company if you do that. We looked at all kinds of different alternatives, fighting the shareholder activists, trying to stay independent, doing what we thought was necessary. I'll always wonder about the path not chosen, because you don't get a do-over, right? But Amazon was such a good solution in so many ways. They wanted to grow their grocery footprint. They liked us. We could tell when we met with them, they really liked and admired Whole Foods Market. They weren't going to dismantle our corporate headquarters. They were going to let us drop prices. That's the thing I was most excited about. With Amazon, we could begin to walk back the whole paycheck branding that had happened to us. And in the first 2 years of that merger, Amazon let us drop our prices significantly 4 times. They also raised the minimum wage to $15, so we were able to pay our team members more. Amazon was a great solution for Whole Foods Market in many, many, many ways. It was a difficult decision because we lost our independence.
The chapter in your book about this, you compare JANA to Tolkien's Ring Wraiths, and you title the chapter "Evolve or Die." Did it feel existential for you at that time?
It really did. We needed to evolve. and they weren't going to give us time to do it. My mind got to the place where it's like, we need time, and that they're not going to give us enough time to do what we need to do. And so Amazon would. That became the best solution. I have to think about what's in the interest of all the stakeholders, the best interest for our investors, but also the best interest for our team members, our customers, our suppliers. What's the best solution? And at the end of the day, I thought Amazon was.
So, seeing Amazon as the best of possible options, I mean, did you hire a banker? Did you cold call Jeff Bezos? And how did you end up in Seattle in a room having a conversation with them?
So I'd met Jeff about a year before at a Microsoft CEO Summit, and I was invited to that. And he and I actually were the two people on a panel. And so I got to meet him and know him then, and we had a lot of common interests. Jeff likes to read. He was particularly interested in science fiction and fantasy. He was into scuba diving, and I've done a lot of scuba diving. And of course, I admired Jeff. I admired Amazon. I mean, I'm a customer of Amazon. I admired. I mean, Jeff Bezos has done something very few people have ever done. He's built this amazing company in a very short period of time that's changed the world. So I was a huge fan of Amazon. And I liked Jeff, and he's an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs have a certain affinity with each other. I mean, you can almost just instantaneously have rapport with somebody because you see the world in so many similar ways. You see the world is ripe with opportunities of creation. So I did like Jeff. Now we didn't stay in touch after that Microsoft Summit, but I came away feeling really good about him personally. So I woke up one morning and I was, not sleeping well, and I was trying to figure out the solution, and then it just popped in my brain one morning when I woke up, what about Amazon? And it was like, and I just got super excited about that idea. I thought, wow, I know they're trying to grow Amazon Fresh. We know how to do physical locations. They're very customer oriented, so are we, and they'll help us be able to drop our prices. Plus, their technological expertise was light years ahead of Whole Foods Markets. They were going to help us there, and they did. They've helped us with technology in many, many ways. So we contacted them we'd hired a company called Tusk Strategies, and they were advising us on partly on defense, but also on public relations as we were in this troubled time.
This is Bradley Tusk.
That's right, Bradley, and one of his partners is a guy named Matt Yale, and Matt had roomed at Yale. He went to Yale. He roomed with Jay Carney, who had been Obama's
his communications director. Yeah,
and he took the same role on at Amazon. So Matt contacted Jay to see if there was any interest, and there was. So just a few days later, we flew down to Seattle in a top secret location, and we met with those guys, and we had a 2 to 3 hour conversation with them, and the Whole Foods team went away super impressed because just how intelligent. They had 4 guys, we had 4 guys, and they were super smart. They asked great questions, and it was like we could just see. We talked about how the synergies might work, and it's like, wow, the whole Amazon Prime. I think that's when I talked about Amazon Prime, I got them excited about that. I said, we could make that our loyalty program with Amazon Prime, and that'd be a real benefit for all the Prime customers and be good for all the Whole Foods customers, because Amazon knew that a huge percentage of their most affluent members were also Whole Foods customers. So we could see lots of synergies there. And just 3 days later, they flew down with a team to Austin and started doing due diligence, and we came to the price fairly quickly, and 6 weeks after that first meeting in Seattle, we'd signed a deal. It was like a whirlwind romance.
And you consummated the marriage with them, and you stayed around for several years. But in 2022, you decided to step down, and you've said many times that having a business is like having a child. What was it like to step down and fully hand off your child to Amazon and move on to new things?
Well, that's very difficult. We'll put that down as one of not the top 2 most difficult decisions, but it was difficult. But I mean, when I retired, I was 69, and I wasn't having as much fun anymore. I mean, we'd gone through the 2 COVID years. We'd gone through a lot of integration. The company was doing well. There was a younger generation that is ready to take over. I didn't want to work as hard, and I wanted to do some other things in life. And I just knew, and I was having some conflict with some of the Amazon executives as well. And I detail that, a little bit of that in the book. And I just felt like, I'm a very inner-directed person. I just clearly began to understand that it was time for me to go. So I knew this was after 44 years or 43 years at that time, that it was, I didn't want to just leave and give 2 weeks notice, right? So I gave a year's notice. And then the guy that I wanted to take my place, Jason Beekle, he'd come to Whole Foods as our chief technology officer, and I made him chief operating officer. I think he was about 45 at that time. He's a super smart guy from the Midwest, grew up in Wisconsin, very high integrity. He loved Whole Foods. I thought, this is the perfect guy to take my place. And Amazon loved Jason because he could do the techno speak with him. And so I pitched Amazon. I just said, I think it's time for me to go. I think Jason ought to take my place. They were thinking the same thing, probably that it was time for me to go, but also Jason would be my best replacement. And so I just sort of the last year, I got everybody used to me leaving. So it was I had a really good goodbye. I mean, a really good last year. And I got a lot of love as I toured all around the company, and I wanted to say goodbye and thank everybody and appreciate them. And so I had really good closure. When I left, I was completed. And with Whole Foods. The book I've just written is my final Whole Foods Market act. One of my gifts to Jason was, I'm not going to stay involved at all. If anybody comes to me complaining about anything, it's like, I had a mantra, that's not my problem anymore. You need to talk, you need to talk to him. There's no shortcut, I'm not helping you, you got to do your own thing here. Because here's the thing, they're going to lead differently than I led, and they should, right? I was good for the company. In other ways, I held it back. And once I was gone, then they could move in the directions that it needed to evolve in. And in some cases, that's maybe a little tighter, a little closer to Amazon. They're a little more integrated into Amazon. I held them back from that to a certain extent. And Amazon, to their credit, was very respectful of me and largely respectful of me, and didn't want to force us in directions that I didn't want us to go.
Did you take a minute? Did you literally go on walkabout as an avid hiker to kind of create some space before your next act?
I was already working on Love.Life before I left. I mean, I've had this dream to do Love.Life since we almost did it back in the 1980s. Love.Life is you can go to Love.Life. We have a website, so you can see it there. And the vision of it is to be basically one-stop medical wellness centers. And so we're opening our first location in El Segundo, California, opening date July 9th. So it's under construction now. I think it's going to be unlike something that's not, people done parts of it, but not done all we've done. We're going to have a healthy food restaurant there. We're going to have a fitness center, a gym, think Equinox. We're going to have a spa, a really nice spa. We're going to have all kinds of recovery modalities. We're going to have all kinds of alternative medical treatments, from acupuncture, cupping, Ayurvedic, physical therapy, chiropractic. I mean, all these different things. And we're going to have medical doctors as well that are functional doctors, that are lifestyle doctors, integrative doctors. And the whole idea is that we want to change the paradigm that people have about wellness and healthcare. And so when do people normally go see a doctor, Jeff? When they're sick. Well, we think the doctor's main role is to help people be so healthy they almost never need to see a doctor because they're sick. The doctor is helping them. We can help people to live longer, have more vital lives, and not just in health, but I think there's emotional and spiritual, and Love.Life's going to try to bring that to people. And we're locating next to one of Whole Foods Market's very best stores in Southern California. So we're giving it every chance to be really successful, and if it is, we're going to open a lot of them, and if it's not, well, there's lots of other things I can do in life.
So I'm curious what you would identify as the biggest scaling lesson from Whole Foods that you're applying to building Love.Life.
What's different today from when I was 24 and starting up a Safer Way is I know a lot more. I have a lot more money, and I have a lot more wisdom. What I don't have is I don't have that same fanatical commitment of energy that I had. So I have to hire more of that and direct it, because I'm not going to work 80-hour weeks for another 10 or 15 years of my life like I did back in the early days. But to scale it, Scaling it's going to be a lot easier. The thing is, before you scale anything, first you have to have a business model that works. First, you have to proof of concept, get your business model to work, tinker around with it, then scale it. And so scaling it, I know how to scale. I know real estate. I know how to build a team. I've already built a good team. I got a lot of ex-Whole Fooders who left Whole Foods that retired and are working with Love.Life now. So I've got talent. We've got money. We just need to get proof of concept, and then we'll begin to raise more money, and we'll start opening these locations around the United States. That's the plan.
Final question for you then. Imagine University of Texas calls you this afternoon and says, John, we'd really love for you to come teach a class at the university. What would you want to teach?
I'd probably want to teach a class on either entrepreneurship or culture. I really do think I know something about how to create good company cultures. The two most important things in a culture, first, everybody wants to have purpose. So part of your job is to create a purpose that people can identify with and internalize for themselves. They want to feel like their work's making a difference. And so it's part of the leader's job to embody that purpose. And then they're like a spark, and they get everybody else on fire for the purpose. And the second thing for great culture is you have to care about people. Everybody wants to feel loved. Everybody wants to be cared about. If you give people purpose and love, that's the basis of a really healthy culture. You have to have other stuff too, good leadership principles, core values, but love and purpose and love, those are the two things that will make a company a transformative company.
I can't imagine a better place to end this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. It's been a pleasure talking with you.